Hello and welcome. We're going to talk about something that's really tough but so important: pregnancy loss. It's a topic that's so often wrapped in silence and confusion, which can make an absolutely devastating experience feel even more lonely. So today, we're going to break that silence with some clear, compassionate information. Let's start by just getting a sense of how many people this really affects.
Okay, first things first, and this is probably the most important thing to absorb. If this has been a part of your story, you have to know just how common it is. 1 in every 4 pregnancies ends in loss. Just let that number sink in. This is not some rare occurrence. It's a huge part of the reproductive story for so many people, and yet we almost never talk about it openly. Knowing the statistic, really feeling it, is the first step to realizing you are not and have never been alone in this.
And this leads us to the single most critical message in this entire explainer. I really want you to hear this. Pregnancy loss is never your fault. That crushing weight of self-blame that so often comes with loss, we have to completely dismantle that, right here, right now. As we're about to see, the reasons are almost always biological and completely, 100% out of your control.
You know, to feel any sense of control in a medical situation, you have to speak the language. And that is especially true when you're trying to navigate the emotional fog of a loss. So let's just quickly run through some of the key terms you might hear from a doctor or read in your chart so you know exactly what's being talked about.
First up is a chemical pregnancy. This is the earliest type of loss you can have. You get that positive test, you might feel that rush of hope for a few days, maybe a week, but the pregnancy ends before it ever develops enough to even be seen on an ultrasound. And even though it happens so early, the emotional whiplash can be absolutely profound.
A miscarriage can be uniquely heartbreaking. This is when an ultrasound confirms there's no longer a heartbeat, that the pregnancy isn't viable, but your body, well, it hasn't gotten the message yet. You might still have all the pregnancy symptoms, and that creates this really painful gap between what your mind knows is true and what your body is still feeling.
Okay, and then there are a few other less common but really critical types of loss to know about. An ectopic pregnancy is a big one. That's when an embryo implants somewhere outside the uterus, usually in a fallopian tube. It's just not a viable situation, and it always requires medical help. A molar pregnancy is different. That's about an abnormal growth of placental cells. And then there's something called a PUL, or pregnancy of unknown location, which is when your hormone levels show an abnormal pregnancy, but doctors can't yet see exactly where it is.
So this brings us to the question that just echoes in your head after every single loss. Why? Why did this happen? That search for an answer is such a natural human part of grieving. And while we don't always get one single perfect reason, we actually do have a pretty good understanding of what the most common causes are.
And honestly, the data gives us a really clear picture. Just look at that huge slice of the chart. The overwhelming majority of early pregnancy losses, we're talking about 60%, are caused by random genetic problems in the embryo. This fact right here just drives home that point again. Loss is usually just a matter of biology, not a personal failure.
So let's break that down. What does genetic factors mean? Well, the number one cause is something called random aneuploidy. That's just a scientific way of saying there was a spontaneous glitch during cell division and the embryo ended up with the wrong number of chromosomes. It just didn't have the right genetic blueprint to grow. In much rarer cases, one of the parents might carry something called a balanced translocation. It's a little genetic quirk in their own DNA that doesn't affect them at all, but can raise the chances of creating an embryo with an imbalance.
Okay, next up, we have anatomic factors. These are basically structural issues with the uterus itself. For example, a uterine septum is a little wall of tissue inside the uterus that someone is born with, and it can sometimes get in the way of implantation. Things like fibroids or polyps can do the same thing. Now, the really important thing to know about this category is that many of these issues can be found and are often totally fixable with surgery.
And finally, there's a bucket of other things that can contribute. We're talking about hormonal or endocrine issues like unmanaged thyroid problems or PCOS, which can affect egg quality. Certain autoimmune or blood clotting disorders can also play a role. And yes, you see lifestyle factors on there. But it's crucial to understand this is about optimizing your overall health to lower your risk. It's not, and I repeat, not about placing blame for a loss.
So understanding the why is one piece of the puzzle. The next piece is figuring out what happens after a loss has been confirmed. You're often thrown into making really big medical decisions at a time when you're incredibly emotional. Knowing what your options are ahead of time can give you back a small sense of control when everything else feels like it's spinning.
Right. So, what does happen next? This is often the first and most scary question.
You're not just trying to process your grief, you suddenly have to make a choice about how to physically manage the loss. So let's walk through what the main options look like.
Generally speaking, you have 3 paths you can go down. The first is called expectant management, which is really just a fancy term for watchful waiting. You wait for your body to pass the pregnancy on its own time. The second is medicated management, where you take medication to help start that process. And the third option is a surgical procedure, which you've probably heard of as a DNC.
So let's quickly compare the 2 active management options. With medication, you're at home, which many people prefer, but the process itself can sometimes drag on and be quite painful. With a surgical DNC, it's all done in a clinic or hospital. It's very quick, and you're under anesthesia. But here's probably the biggest difference to consider. A DNC allows your doctor to easily collect tissue for genetic testing, and that testing can be the thing that gives you real answers about why the loss happened.
After you've been through a loss, the path forward can feel, well, pretty foggy. But this is the moment where knowledge really does become power. This last section is all about finding answers, thinking about proactive steps, and most of all, holding on to hope for the future.
Let's talk about something called recurrent pregnancy loss, or RPL. The medical world now defines this as 2 or more losses. This is actually a really big deal because it used to be 3. This change means you don't have to go through a 3rd loss before a deep dive investigation is recommended. So if you've had 2 losses, you can and should be your own biggest advocate and ask for a full workup.
Now, for anyone who has been through RPL, the future can start to feel really dark, and it is so easy to lose hope. But I need you to hold on to this one fact because it is so important. The data is overwhelmingly incredibly hopeful. The odds are still very, very much on your side.
And here's what that hope looks like in a number. Even after going through multiple losses, more than 70% of couples go on to have a healthy, successful pregnancy. That is such a powerful statistic. It means that loss, even recurrent loss, is not an ending. It doesn't have to be the end of your story.
And this quote right here, this really sums up the whole reason we're talking about this today. Grief is a journey, and it's a hard one, but it doesn't have to be a journey you take in the dark. By just understanding the language, the potential causes, and your options, you can move through this from a place of strength and empowerment instead of a place of fear.
So we're going to leave you with this thought. Your journey forward, whatever that looks like for you, it always starts with a single step, a single question. Maybe it's asking your doctor about a specific test. Maybe it's finally sharing your story with a friend. Or maybe it's just giving yourself permission to grieve without any blame. You have the information now. What's the first question you're going to ask?